Hello everyone, welcome to The Great Everything, the world's only podcast dedicated to art, donuts and transformation. I'm Patrick, a former banking lawyer who saw the light and quit to dedicate my life to culture and philosophy. Today is a rather special episode of The Great Everything because it is episode 100, and as a special treat to myself, I decided to bring in my friend Marc, whom I left my corporate career with to found thegreateverything.com. Then what happened is he moved on to another corporate career, and he's still involved, but I decided that I wanted to be a full-time podcaster, and here I am doing the Great Everything podcast. Now, he's not been on the show before, but I thought that it might be nice to bring in someone who is intimately familiar with the idea of the Great Everything, with what it stands for, what it stood for, and what hopefully it will stand for continuing on into the future. So, on the 100th episode of The Great Everything, I bring you my friend Marc, co-founder of The Great Everything.
Hey man, how's it going?
Hey man, how's life?
Pretty good. It's a sunny day in Paris and the thunderstorms have not started yet, so I'm very happy. I have this amazing balcony that has a 180 view over all of Paris because I'm way east, so I can see all the way west over the Eiffel Tower and Montmartre and everything.
So you're saying you're in France, is what you're saying?
Well, I'm doing Europe.
Right. So, dear listeners, this is Marc, with whom I started The Great Everything 2 years ago and change. Today is the 100th episode, and that's why I have the great pleasure of bringing you on to the show as someone who not only had the idea with me of The Great Everything, but who actually came up with the name The Great Everything. So, 100th episode, I thought I might call you on to shoot the shit with and to just chat about what The Great Everything is, what it means to you, to hear your thoughts on this life project of ours. So, who are you, Marc?
Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, it's funny you referenced the name. I remember very clearly the moment that we sort of agreed that was going to happen. I was sat at my desk at the law firm we were at, and we'd been agonizing over this name for I don't even know how long.
Oh,
exchanging pitiful ideas we exchanged. Things like Find My True and Truegasm.
Oh, you loved Truegasm. Wait, okay, let's actually start at the beginning, right? What The Great Everything is and was, among many things, but really at the core of it, at the heart of it, is a story. Two corporate lawyers at one of the largest and most prestigious law firms in the world, in London, in stereotypically successful careers, but we were dreadfully dissatisfied with the quality of our life, and we wanted to do something different. The Great Everything, or rather this unnamed at that time project, was a kind of, it was the dream. It was what was going to get us out of an unsatisfying career and into a life of meaning and purpose and of doing something that truly reflected our own personalities. So I'll let you begin, but I would like you to start with the appetizer.
Appetizer, I maintain, was a great idea. Whenever I talk to people about it, their eyes light up. And I remember pitching this idea to you of, in shorthand, a meal delivery service that would provide jobs for immigrant women and men who could cook authentic meals of foreign flavors. And I remember pitching that with you to a room full of 50, 100 people, maybe more, including some investors. I don't know who they were, but they were looking for an idea to incubate and to scale up. And it was certainly one of the poorest moments in my public speaking life, because I just had utter wobbles inside. I'd brainwashed you into doing this with me.
Oh, I remember. Sorry, I couldn't remember what you were talking about, but now I remember you took me to this event that was about food startups. And we were on stage and we delivered some kind of speech in which we were trying to convince people that it was a good idea to fund us so that we could exploit immigrant women, force them to cook, and then to deliver their home-cooked meals to people via their little mopeds. I mean, I'm not against exploiting brown women. I just think that it's not necessarily a business that I find meaningful.
You may laugh, but if we had executed this, I maintain that 10 years down the line, this would have been a cool origin story of, I prefer to think of it as providing income for disenfranchised women, but I agree that underpaying for tasty food is another way you might frame it.
So we played around with appetizer, and then what happened?
I don't remember the order of events, but we'd been having conversations for a long time, primarily on your couch and also in one of our offices around where we were at, what we wanted the next few years to look like, and what we could possibly do to unlock, I think, some kind of advancement. And when I think of the great everything, I kind of look back on it and think that the great everything was partly a product. It was something that we wanted to produce and to share and put out in the world. And I know you don't like the product term, but that's how I shorthand it. But it was also a process of creating some kind of excuse to exit our current situation and create, better future avenues. And in a sense, it served both purposes, notwithstanding your current enormous quandaries. But I think ultimately, when we look back on it, it will have served its both of its purposes for both of us.
So what was the product initially?
I think the product was something that reflected three broad themes that were ongoing at that time. One, I think really importantly, was the bond between us as friends, as two guys who really bonded at law school, wondering what the hell they were doing. It's amazing to me that this whole friendship sprouted from that seed and from such a shitty environment. I think the second is the loss of direction that we'd come to find in our careers and just wondering what to do about that. And then thirdly, this trio of interests that we had and convictions, you might say, that we've called, thanks to you, art, donuts, transformation. But this idea that there are things out there in the world that either provide a sort of a more enduring meaning or a real deep moment of pleasure or an opportunity to change your outlooks and change the way you engage with your surroundings. And that trio combined, I think, was what we settled on as the closest we've ever come to a purpose for being and an objective to become more proximate to, basically.
It was really about great things. We were obsessed, and we still remain obsessed, but I remember so many of our conversations used to be about what makes something great. We were driven partly by our shared love for quality in whatever field of life, in whatever art form, in whatever food. It didn't matter whether we were talking about barbecue ribs or a burger or a donut, or if we were talking about art or football players. We understood that greatness has some kind of quality, and we are fascinated by what defines it, what it is. It's quite ineffable, but you can sense greatness coming from something, and we wanted to share that. And at the same time, I think we were also driven by a certain scorn towards this mainstream acceptance of mediocrity and elevating mediocrity. And so this idea of what is great, that was, I think, one of the core ideas behind what we wanted to do and what we wanted to share.
Yeah, no, I'd second all of that. And it's amazing to me that it actually became the seed of so much change afterwards, both in terms of the great everything as a project between us and the life decisions that ensued, and also just longer term objectives that we've now fixed ourselves that aren't quite the same, but that did grow from a single shared instigation, really.
It was interesting because at the start, it was a whole different idea. The product, it was like, we'll introduce people to the things that are truly great. And so we started this blog together and we launched that, and it had a whole set of articles about like the best TV on at the moment and the best growers champagne. You did one on barbecue. It was introductions to great things, making them accessible so that more people would know them. But then we changed. We kind of started going into what you called the think feasts. And that became quite difficult, right? Because how do you fit big ideas into the idea of great?
Yeah, I think the thought feasts were very difficult to maintain, but there was certainly a time where we thought, okay, if people aren't actually that interested at scale in being introduced to things, or if they don't trust us to do that, or if we're not able to access them, then maybe we can garner more of a following and create more impact by sort of tackling more difficult topics. So you wrote a phenomenal piece breaking down the intricacies of time and how time works. We've got a piece coming out at some point in the future on porn and porn's effect on psychology and the male brain and its outlooks. So we thought that combined with amazing cartoons and all of that was going to be our recipe. And really, I think we struggled for a long time to settle on a recipe, and eventually worked out some snappier formats for our content, and chiefly allowed you to pivot onto podcasting and onto Anchor as a means of seeing whether we could convey our ideas in more effective formats.
The audio thing was always playing on our minds, because remember, from the start, one of the issues was that I'm a ridiculous perfectionist when it comes to writing. And remember the agonizing conversations we used to have over every blog post, because I needed it to be perfect before I could even consider sending it in for your look. It was awful. And so I said, this is just not scalable. This is not feasible. And I always felt more comfortable talking, obviously, because I'm a chatterbox. And so I thought, we need to try and do a podcast. But for some reason, it just never happened until you introduced me to Anchor. And then I just started doing my own thing just for shits and giggles.
But you know what, Patrick? I think that several years ahead, I don't know how many it will be, your essential enjoyment of hosting, of structuring conversations and bringing people into them, of sharing information in a way that resonates and that touches people, or that allows them to perhaps frame their thinking more clearly. I see that actually eventually being an experience that we deliver in face-to-face format for real, because my parallel things that get me going more, which are trying to draw on a little spirit of creativity to create micro pleasures, whether that's in food or translating the the properties of a wine in a way that actually people get it and can enjoy it and can find it a succulent experience. These are all things which I would love to translate into a physical place in hell knows where people come and can have a combination of cultural learning experiences, thinking experiences, but also just a teasing of the senses and little micro pleasures in between.
Yeah, okay, basically you want to open a brothel where I give speeches, that's fine. As long as my duties are relegated to speech giving, you can take care of the rest. One thing that I wanted to ask you, and I think this is probably something that resonates with quite a few people who might be listening, is, well, you said that we've been through so many iterations with the blog, and I've definitely gone through quite a few different versions of what the podcast is. And I think one difficulty that we've always found, and I'm always finding now, is that we want to be able to engage in broad experiences. Yet we live in a world which is hyper specialized, and taking it down to podcasting, you hear like it's 101. People, hey, how do I start a podcast? The first advice is find your niche, your little niche. And it's like, oh, so I'm a dog trainer. Okay, so have dog training podcasts with Brian, or, I'm a plumber. So it's all very related to one specific aspect of these people's lives, or rather their jobs. Whereas we, both by personality and by design, we wanted something that defied all that enabled us to learn and then share things broadly. And that is hinted at, of course, in the name, the great everything. We want to talk about everything because everything is important.
The connection between everything.
Exactly. The one thing that unites them all, which is something I do with the podcast specifically, is I try to tie it into a coherent worldview. But at the same time, this projectual decision does make trouble, doesn't it, in terms of creating and as you call it, a product, and then marketing that product.
Yeah, it's really difficult, because once you go down a multi-thematic route, whether it's for a website or a podcast, your only way to really scale and disseminate more broadly is to get people to love it and to share it themselves, because Google doesn't generally reward you for having multiple focuses. Google will push you up the rankings if you focus on a narrower set of subjects, and then if people like it. What are the search terms for the great everything? What, culture, philosophy, and self-development, maybe? Great. I mean, they're three of the most competitive terms you could want, so they don't work. And ironically, if we'd written 70% the same content, but we'd marketed it as a website for sad lawyers, we'd probably have a small business right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's genuinely difficult, because the second bit of advice, of course, is find your audience. Well, who the hell's your audience when one day you're writing or talking about Blind Willie Johnson, the bluesman, and then the next day you're talking about the nature of time, or which wine to eat your barbecue with? You're looking for a very specific type of person, someone who is curious in the broader sense, someone who wants to learn something new without necessarily wanting it to be in a specific direction, as long as it all comes together in the end. But how many people out there like that are there? I'm sure there's a lot, but by definition, they don't have a community.
No, absolutely. And I think candidly, we also went through different iterations of ourselves. On top of the issues you've mentioned, we've compounded that by taking perhaps a little while to settle on what we actually want to happen with it and with us.
I guess ultimately the objective is to be doing something that you spend your day doing it, and no matter how tiring and stressful it might be, and it certainly should be, at least you know that those hours, that time, were spent in a way that make you feel proud or at least satisfied. Mm-hmm. But you seem to be doing well. You abandoned a corporate career for another corporate career. No.
I'm thrilled. I've got to say, I'm in a really good place on the work front, and in terms of how I'm spending the majority of my time. I ended up finally getting into a career that I think matches both my sense of purpose and my desire to always be using like a diverse skill set and sort of combining macro level thinking with micro analyses. And that's strategy consulting, but it's strategy consulting purely for the social sector, for social impact and for development. So for example, right now I'm overseeing research and conducting analyses that's going to lead to hopefully a pharmaceutical company creating a brand new global contraceptive. And these are things that have scalable impact and that are intellectually stimulating that I just never thought I would be able to combine into a single job. But I think you've got a version of this definitely coming your way as well.
I think I've kind of settled on where I'm heading in terms of the great everything and beyond that. I see myself as wanting to have social impact, but primarily as an educator, because whether it's teaching philosophy to knowledge-hungry young adults at a university, or it's trying to spread the kind of ideas that I think are going to be helpful if we're going to survive the crucial knots that we're going to be facing in the next few decades, the thing that will save humanity is education.
Happy conversation we're having.
But yeah, so 100 of these fuckers I've done.
I think I'm always just amazed by the fact that actually we have readers and we have listeners, and that's not because, I think what we do is poor. I think a lot of it is really good, and a lot of it has not been good, but has helped us be better in the future. But I'm very happy that we have an audience. We have people who share things we're interested in, people who've stimulated us to actually think differently about what we do, people who question some of the things we say, people who just validate and share what we do and say thank you. And that is already far beyond what I had planned after 2 years. And
fuck you, Mark. You planned that we were going to be millionaires by the first year of blogging because you made me read that Canadian douchebag who just travels around.
Yeah. Then we didn't find our niche.
You were the one who was like, I refuse to be niche. I can't work in these conditions. I need to say what I want to say.
That's a remarkable impression, Mark. But anyway, Mark, thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to talk to me on the 100th episode of The Great Everything. And happy 100, I guess.
Happy 100. We'll speak to you soon.
Take care, buddy.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Great Everything. And if you like the show, there's a few ways you can help out. You can leave a review on iTunes or anywhere else you listen to this podcast. Or you can share it, embed it, talk about it on your podcast or write a blog about it. Or you could just add me on the various Twitters and Instagrams out there. But if you want to be a part of the conversation, you can call in using Anchor, or you can look up The Great Everything on Facebook. I have a discussion group there where people talk about literally everything, from ethics to politics to Marvel movies. So if that's your thing, check it out. I hope I see you again here, there, or anywhere else, frankly. Until then, grazie e arrivederci.
Well, arrivederci, Luigi.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.